On today's video, we're going to be looking at the top 10 cities in Florida that are going to crap very quickly. These are cities that are deteriorating in their condition. We're going to give you some analytics to show you that these cities are going to crap, but we're also going to give you some real life experience. I want to start off by talking about the city of Hialeah. Now, most of the online lists that you're going to find about cities in Florida that are going to crap are going to include Hialeah. Another list called the top 10 most miserable cities in America included Hialeah among one of the most miserable cities in America. Now, there's some analytical abnormalities about Hialeah that can make it look bad on paper. Now, one of the most resounding attributes about this city is that it's almost 98% Hispanic, the vast majority being Cuban. Thus, it's somewhat of an analytical abnormality of a city, but with that, many online lists have started to label Hialeah the worst at a lot of things. I've seen it in the top 10 cities going to crap. I've seen it on an online list of cities that are miserable. I've also seen it recently on an online list of cities that are segregated. Now, how can a city that is 99% all the same race be segregated is an interesting question to me, because it would seem that a city that is predominantly one race would be difficult to be segregated. And the term segregation doesn't really exist in Hialeah. I don't understand what they're referring to. Perhaps they're referring to the fact that there's a small African American community within Hialeah. I don't know what is going on with these online lists, but all of these online lists about Florida, all these online lists just want to throw Hialeah underneath the bus. But there's a lot of great things about Hialeah as well. For one, the population is decreasing, and that has led to a lot of people that make these top 10 online lists to put Hialeah on a list of worst places because the population is decreasing. Well, the reason that there's a decrease in population in Hialeah is because there's been a decrease in population density. It's not a Rust Belt town that people are leaving because there's no industries. Hialeah's population is decreasing because the population density is decreasing, which is not exactly a bad thing for a place that has one of the highest population densities in the United States. To show you examples of other cities that are having the same thing happen, Naples Park, which is a very nice suburb of Naples, houses there are going into the millions, they're seeing a population decrease as well for the same reason. Less population density. Airbnbs and vacation rentals have contributed greatly to that. And the same thing's happening in North Miami. So the people that compile these top 10 online lists, they get analytics, they get information, but they don't understand what that information means. They make wrong assumptions off the information they're getting, so they make these top 10 lists and they throw the city of Hialeah underneath the bus, even though it's a city that has one of the lowest homicide rates of anywhere in America. 3 per 100,000 in a city of 200,000 people. That makes Hialeah one of the safest cities in the United States, and it is one of the largest cities in Florida with 220,000 people. When it comes to poverty analytics, Hialeah really doesn't look good on paper. But again, it's not just reading a number, it's understanding what those numbers mean. In the case of Hialeah, you have a lot of people that came from Cuba and they're on a fixed income because now they're retired. These people are just living with very small economical means. So I'm tired of seeing the city of Hialeah end up on these top 10 lists of the worst places. On today's video, we're going to give you the real top 10 cities in Florida that are actually going to crap. And I'm not just looking at analytics and drawing up conclusions blindly. We're going to look at the homicide rates of these cities. What homicide rates are these cities having? Are these cities starting to see a lot more murders than before? We're not just looking at which cities are generically the worst in Florida. We're looking at which cities are starting to move in a bad direction. That means there's an increase in the homicide rate. There's an increase in homelessness. There's an increase in overdose deaths, which is a huge thing going on in Florida. And we're going to look at other analytics that are a little bit more strange, but give us an indication that these cities are moving in the wrong direction. There's a difference between firearm mortality and homicide rate. We're also going to be looking at firearm mortality. That means how many people are getting killed by firearms. That doesn't exactly mean it's a homicide, but it's still a firearm death. We're also going to look at analytics for unintentional deaths, and this is going to give us a more broad picture of what's happening in some of these Florida towns. So we're going to use these interesting but very reliable metrics to really understand what cities in Florida are actually going to crap. Number one is Pensacola, the most northwest city in Florida, is currently the leader in Florida for drug poisoning deaths. That means that this city is in a drug crisis. At 75 per 100,000, the overdose death rate in Pensacola is on par with Philadelphia, known as one of the most drugged out cities in the world. Despite having beautiful beaches, the city of Pensacola is really struggling. They also have a ridiculously high rate of unintentional deaths at 118 per 100,000. Unintentional deaths means deaths that are not blamed exactly on homicide. These are people just getting hurt randomly, and that contributes to a lot of deaths in Pensacola. Many times it's because people are neglectful, careless, or outright doing things that are stupid. Workplace accidents also fall under this category. To give you a comparison, in the city of Miami-Dade County, the unintentional death rate is about 30 per 100,000. So in Pensacola, you are about 3 times more likely to die from an unintentional injury. When you look deep into these unintentional injuries, many times they are workplace-related injuries, and people like migrant workers, Hispanics, and blacks are usually going to be more likely to fall under those categories. Thus, unintentional deaths kind of indirectly play into regional racism, which means that certain types of individuals are more likely to do jobs that are more dangerous, and thus they're more likely to end up getting hurt. And that's not my opinion. This is analytical. Certain minorities are more likely to have these types of things happen to them because of the types of jobs they do. So racism and income inequality plays a huge role into the higher rates of unintentional deaths in these areas, or in a city like Miami, for example, it's a lot less likely to happen. The homicide rate in Escambria County, where Pensacola sits, is at about 12 per 100,000. It means it's even higher than Miami. So when you start to look at analytics, you'll find out that Pensacola is a place that has a lot of angry people, a lot of accidents, a lot of violence, a lot of addiction leading to death. And all that means that this city is really moving in the wrong direction. A contributing factor to why Pensacola is having this problem is that it's adjacent to Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana. These are the states with the highest homicide rates and the worst prison systems in America, which means that many people from those adjacent states end up moving to this part of Florida to escape the brutal law enforcement policies of those states. And thus, Pensacola regionally has been sucking up a lot of garbage from adjacent states, which has made Pensacola one of the worst cities in Florida. To the point that Pensacola doesn't even feel like it's a city within Florida. It almost feels like a city in Mississippi, Alabama, or Louisiana. It's really got everything of the worst going for it right now. And undoubtedly, when you think about cities in Florida that are definitely heading in the wrong direction, it's absolutely Pensacola. Now, despite the fact that all these horrible things are happening in Pensacola, many online lists of Florida are putting it among the best places to live in Florida. Why is that? Well, these online lists are created by people who have job openings in Pensacola that they need to fill, and thus they advertise the city as a great place to live, but the people who are spreading this information are doing it because they want to attract people to the area for their own financial benefit. So it's not that these online lists are even credible. Many times these online lists, the people that make them have some type of financial interest in making them. Thus, these online lists can many times be very misleading. They're almost like promotional campaigns by companies who are trying to get people to move to certain cities for whatever type of financial incentive. So you just cannot trust these online lists, or you have to at least question their motives when they put a city like Pensacola among the list of places you should move to, when in reality, you have things like this right here. Not very pretty. At the end of the day, Pensacola is definitely heading in the wrong direction. Addiction, homelessness, crime, all that is increasing, and it doesn't seem like a type of place you would want to put your family. Number 2 is the Villages, America's oldest city. The Villages is known as a place where people retire, and it's supposed to be like this dreamland, Disneyland for old people. But despite mostly being retired older people that are moving to Sumter County where the Villages sits, the analytics for this county have become alarming in the last few years. North Central Florida is in the grips of a drug overdose epidemic, and Sumter County is not exempt. 53 people per every 100,000 are dying from drug poisoning deaths or overdoses in Sumter County. That is alarmingly high. To have an idea, the state of California is about 26, so you're talking roughly about 2 times more likely to overdose in the Villages than you are to overdose in California. The homicide rate in Sumter County is now 11 per 100,000, which is almost double the state average, and it makes it more dangerous than cities like Miami, Fort Lauderdale, and West Palm Beach. How does a rural community known for retirement end up being more deadly than a city like Miami? I have no idea. But in this part of Florida, you would think people would be happy that they're retiring in the Villages, but they're not. People are angry, conflicted, road rage is common, and thus events like that many times, unfortunately, end up getting as violent as turning into homicides, and that is seriously disappointing. The firearm mortality rate in Sumter County is 22 per 100,000, an alarmingly high figure. When you combine the homicide rate, the overdose death rate, and the firearm mortality rate, you realize that there's a lot of death violence happening in the Villages. And the unintentional death rate is 107 per 100,000. Again, abnormally high. I'm pretty sure all the golf cart lanes contribute to that. At first glance, the Villages might seem like this beautiful place to retire, but when you start to look at these analytics, you realize that it's actually more dangerous than many large cities like Tampa, Orlando, or Miami. I haven't spent a lot of time in the Villages, but on my few trips to the Villages, I've noticed that people are very aggressive, conflictive. Let's take a look at some of the scenes that I've recorded in the Villages. There, man.
Get up there.
Well, tell you what,
people here.
Well, I'm a people too. You don't think I'm a people?
People walking.
But I'm walking right now. They're a danger to me.
No, they ain't.
There they are.
Get your butt out of here.
What do you call me?
I didn't call you anything.
I'll press charges on you right now.
Go ahead.
I'll lawyer you up so quick you won't believe it, goddamn. Go ahead. Half of them are related to me. Oh, where's the road? Oh, okay. I don't know where I'm going. I'm lost. Oh, okay. I'm lost. I don't know where I'm going. Ah! I think we're still going the wrong way. And don't know why. I keep on going.
Is that electric?
Yes, sir. It's just like a golf cart, probably.
Oh, you're not fast then.
No, it's not that fast. I have no.
Trying to scare you. I just.
Oh, you're good. No, you're good. So as you can see, these people in the Villages are always conflicted. They're always looking for a fight. They're always trying to tell other people what they can and can't do. They're just really sad and miserable people that end up in the Villages. But these rabid old folks are not just angry Karens. They're actually contributing to homicide, accidents, and overall, the Villages is starting to look like a really crappy place to live in Florida. Number 3 is Port St. Lucie. And I know this one's also going to be surprising to a lot of people because we think of Port St. Lucie as a suburban area that isn't going to have these problems. But if you look at the recent analytics, you can tell there's definitely something moving in the wrong direction in what is otherwise a beautiful place to live. The homicide rate in St. Lucie County is now 9.4 per 100,000, making it more deadly than Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach County. You would think because this is the northern county that is the most suburban that they would be the safest, but it actually isn't the case. And I think what's happening here is a lot of people that can't afford South Florida are moving a little bit further north, and a lot of the gangbangers and bad people that just can't afford to stay in Miami ended up here. So despite the fact it's a nice, beautiful suburb, and it actually has some great analytics in some categories. For example, in this county, African Americans make more than white, so they do have some good analytics. The firearm mortality rate here is 19 per 100,000, which is unusually high for what is a suburban area for the most part. So we're starting to see that this county, which surprisingly beautiful, suburban, you would think this is the type of place that wouldn't have problems. Their analytics are looking worse than some of the larger cities in South Florida. And overall, it really isn't a bad place to live. Most people would consider themselves fortunate to be able to live here. But once again, some of these analytics are disturbingly high. So the term for a place like Port St. Lucie is a word known as bougie. It means that the place is suburban, it's nice, but it still has some criminal elements. Number 4 is Moore Haven, located in rural Glades County. This is in south central Florida near the Florida Lake Okeechobee. This area out of nowhere shot up to 65 per 100,000 on the overdose rate. Out of nowhere, drugs flooded this rural community. Investments have been leaving this area. It seems like the local government has a show code where not too many businesses are opening. The businesses that are opening are closing. And well, there really isn't too much available even for the people to have a grocery store in Moore Haven. The homicide rate is at 12 per 100,000, which is significantly higher than all the other counties in South Florida. The unintentional death rate is 153 per 100,000, being the highest in the entire state of Florida. There's absolutely no reason why so many people are dying in this county unnecessarily. A lot of it has to do with farm work, careless people, untrained workers. The point being that workers here have some of the worst working conditions of anywhere in Florida. And if you are unskilled and end up working in this county, your life may mean very little to the employers. With no community investment, extraordinarily high overdose death rates, Florida's highest incidence of unintentional injury deaths, all that leads to this part of Florida being a place that's definitely going to crap. The analytics here definitely don't look good. The worst part is how alarmingly rapidly these changes have happened. I mean, Moore Haven and Glades County, it just got really bad over the last few years out of nowhere. If this trend continues, there's no telling how bad things can get here. And despite all those challenges, some rural communities out here are paying as much as $500 a month for their electrical bill. So despite the fact there's a lack of infrastructure, the few utilities that are out here are pretty much price gouging the life out of the local community. It's a place where a few people are enriching themselves off the poverty of the masses. One of the saddest things about poverty in South Central Florida is that it almost always seems that the reason there's so much poverty and bad conditions for the people here is because somebody is enriching themselves through the misery of others. Number 5 is Arcadia, Florida. DeSoto County has some of the most abysmal analytics for income of anywhere in the state of Florida. The homicide rate here is just under 10 per 100,000, meaning that Arcadia is more deadly than Miami. The unintentional injury death rate is 115 per 100,000, way too many unnecessary deaths. Arcadia barely even has their roads paved, having one of the most embarrassing road conditions of anywhere in the state of Florida. But the local county officials are too busy enriching their friends to care about the condition of their city. We talked to local business owners in Arcadia who told us that if you're not part of the good old boy system here, and you don't know or are friends with the right people, your business is constantly subjected to unnecessary inspections, and chances are those inspectors are going to want something from you that they're not going to expect from other people. Despite the many challenges that this county and city face, local government is more concerned with lining the pockets of their friends than making sure that the city has opportunities. The city is also plagued with a large variety of different gangs. This is definitely a city in Florida that's going to crap very quickly. SB 1718 drew a fatal blow to the economy of this region. Communities like Arcadia that depended heavily on agriculture suffered greatly from these new anti-immigration laws, as these were the only sources of income for people in this community. This area is just economically being choked and no relief is in sight. Number 6 is Wauchula, Florida. The homicide rate here is 12 per 100,000, double the state average. Recently, the area suffered greatly from Hurricane Ian, bringing both wind and flood destruction to a very poor area. Another blow to this area was SB 1718. The area heavily depended on agriculture. Undocumented workers were a huge part of the labor force here, and with these new anti-immigration laws, Wauchula and the surrounding area has really suffered. Without a doubt, U.S. citizens are not going to work picking oranges, and thus these entire industries that fed these small towns are now being choked by the new state regulations, and the people living out here are watching their crops and their fields go to waste. While the town of Wauchula has some of the lowest drug overdose death rates in the entire state of Florida, I suspect that that's going to change drastically over the next few years. The combination of the new immigration laws and the destruction of Hurricane Ian have left this town in complete disrepair, and this poor, impoverished area doesn't have the resources or the economical ability to recover from these damages, which means that Wauchula will sadly go in the wrong direction in the coming years. Wauchula is one of my favorite small towns in Florida. These are exemplary country people with great values. The problems they're facing are out of their control. The state laws are out of their control. It's one tiny town dealing with powers that are much bigger than it's able to manage. And it's really sad to see how on a state level they're destroying a town. If you ever want to explore a beautiful small town with great food and amazing people, consider visiting Wauchula. But unfortunately, despite the fact that the people here are great and they really deserve better than this, it seems like some of the things that are causing Wauchula to go to crap really are external factors that a small town really cannot control. Number 7 is Dixie County, Florida, which consists of Cross City and Old Town. These are two small rural communities right next to each other, right next to the Swanee River. Now, this area has always been poor, but it used to have good crime analytics. Unfortunately, over the last few years, things here have really gone to crap. This rural community is really going in the wrong direction. I guess the first place to start is how drugs have ravaged this small rural community, and really all of North Central Florida's rural communities have been ravaged by the plague of addiction. The homicide rate for Dixie County is now 18.6 per 100,000. That makes it as dangerous as a city like Chicago. For black males in this county, the homicide rate puts you at about 50 per 100,000. Absolutely abnormally high. And the firearm fatality rate in this county is 33 per 100,000. It might be time to take away these people's weapons for their own freaking good. Overall, Dixie County, Florida is really going to crap, and adjacent counties like Levy and Gilchrist are also heading in the same direction. Drugs have really ravaged this part of Florida and destroyed it little by little. And if you start to break down violence analytics by race, you'll see that Hispanics and blacks are considerably more likely to be victims, which means that in some way or another, there's issues with racism here as well. When racial inequality is so bad in an area that you can actually track it analytically and see the difference between races and how some people are disproportionately more likely to be a victim, that's never good. Number 8 is Palatka, Florida. This place has bad analytics in every category imaginable. And when you break it down by race, you can see that Hispanics and blacks are disproportionately really being victimized here. Palatka is a small little country town to the south of Jacksonville, and boy does this area have a lot of problems. This county has the highest number of self-inflicted deaths of anywhere in Florida. That is a very sad and depressing analytic to have. That in itself says everything you need to know about what's going on in this part of the state. The unintentional injury death rate is 117 per 100,000. Again, about 3 to 4 times higher than a city like Miami, which just goes to show that people here are just reckless, careless, and that your life here means almost nothing. When you start to look at health metrics in this particular part of the state of Florida, the only word that comes to mind is sad and depressing. Everything that's health related here is doing really bad, and definitely it's only going to get worse. Number 9 is Okeechobee, Florida. 102 per 100,000 is the unintentional injury death rate in this county. That's ridiculously high. Jobs in agriculture and unsanitary, unsafe practices. These people here are completely freaking reckless. Some years back, Okeechobee had some of the lowest drug death rates in Florida. As most of South Central Florida over the last few years, that has changed rapidly. As of the most recent information, the overdose death rate in Okeechobee County is 52 per 100,000, and that shot up overnight, which means that this area has seen an explosion of drug addiction leading to death over the last few years. Small towns in Florida are really going to crap quickly. You would never know that listening to a Jason Aldean song. And it's really sad how Glades, Okeechobee, these counties really did not have a drug problem a few years ago, and out of nowhere they're seeing overdoses left and right. And with laws like SB 1718 that destroy Florida's agriculture, we can only expect over the next few years for things to get really bad in these small towns that used to depend heavily on agriculture. This area is simply taking the brunt of all the legislation that Florida has made against illegal immigration, and it's already having a horrific impact on these communities. And over the next few years, as a continued economical chokehold grows on these communities, we can only expect things to get worse. Homicide rates in Okeechobee County are abnormally low at 2 per 100,000, but when you see their unintentional death rates, their drug overdose death rates climbing, I can assure you that that low rate will not continue for too long. Usually these things all work in hand. When you have more drugs, more deaths, more carelessness in the community, you can expect homicides to increase as well. So safety that Okeechobee County used to have in the future is definitely looking in peril. We were looking to buy a mobile home in the town of Okeechobee a few years back, and the realtor told me, honey, you guys are young, you're successful, don't put yourself in a town like this. The realtor literally told us that we were way too good off to end up in a situation like living in a miserable town like this. That was kind of shocking because she literally could have had a sale, but she told us, you guys are young, you're doing good in life, you don't want to end up here. Number 10 is Sebring, Florida. Now the analytics here are not ridiculously bad, but they're all above the state average. The homicide rate here is higher than Miami, above the state average. The overdose death rate here, it's not tremendously high, but it's still above the state average, and so on. In every single category you look at, things here don't look horrendous, but they also don't look good. And just like Port St. Lucie, a lot of the people that are relocating that can't afford to live in South Florida are ending up in Sebring, and that is a problem. Because these are people that are used to making higher incomes, they're moving here for affordability, and they're all struggling to find jobs. And it has created a situation where now you have a small town that doesn't have any sources of income, but you have people moving here from big cities that are used to making income, making the labor force extraordinarily competitive. Finding a good paying job here is almost impossible, and with new growth in the area, it's only going to make it even worse. The more expensive South Florida gets, the more people are dislocated and forced to move to places like Sebring, and that means that you get all of the bad elements from the larger cities pushed into places like Sebring, and that is why these areas continue to struggle with high crime analytics, because you're displacing people from big cities that cannot afford it anymore, and they're ending up in places like Port St. Lucie, Fort Pierce, Sebring. These places are chronically suffering from people outflowing from Miami moving here. And sure, while these places are definitely more affordable than Miami, they don't offer good sources of income. Highlands County is plagued with a lot of issues, and one of those issues being that they simply do not help small businesses get started. The citrus industry had a complete chokehold on the economy here, and they made it very difficult for anyone to be self-employed because they wanted the entire local workforce to be at their disposal. So here's a county that was in the pocket of big citrus interests. Now that the state of Florida is destroying those industries with laws like SB 1718, now there's neither agriculture nor the opportunity for people to be self-employed. What do you think that's going to mean for people that are moving here? What type of prospects does somebody have moving to Sebring when it's rigged up to fail on both ends? They always try to rebrand these towns as the next and up-and-coming thing, but if you do your research, these towns have been failure for generation after generation of people moving here. It's failed for a lot of other people, and it's going to continue to fail in the future because you don't have the essential economical industries for people to be able to sustain their lifestyles. There simply isn't any entry of income. The more people that move here, the more complicated things get in this area because you're limiting the few resources that are here have to be distributed even more among the people living here. It's not a place where the more people move here, the better off you are. The more people move here, the worse things get because there's only so much input economically that the area can provide. It's unsustainable. I don't care what you tell me about what the crap is going on in Sebring, Florida. This place will never really be able to get ahead of itself because the laws on a state level are destroying the agriculture, which is the only real industry out here. And the more people move out here, the less is available for them. It's a never-ending vicious cycle that will ensure that a place like Sebring, Florida is only going to get worse, not better. At the end of the day, people are not moving to Sebring to be successful. People are moving to Sebring because they can't afford Miami anymore.